Good evening, Detroit Lakes. This is the Vikings Territory Breakdown. I am your host, Joe Johnson, owner of VikingsTerritory.com, PurplePTSD.com, and MiniIce.com, as well as about 100 other sites that are launching in the next 3 to 4 weeks. So, it'll be an interesting, sleepless fortnight for me. Four score. Anyway, someone was around for that.
How do you do it, Joe? How do you do it, and why do you do it? That's what I'd like.
Those questions. It's a Venn diagram that becomes a perfect circle, and the answer is I don't know. I was going to make a joke about Joe being around for Abraham Lincoln, that quote from Abraham Lincoln, but now I'm explaining it, and the timing's wrong. So
yeah, you shouldn't have done.
Stepped on its home run. Oh,
you know, you think after 3 to 4 years of podcasting together, we'd have some sort of rapport. But Mr. Joe Oberle is here as always. How are you doing, man?
Good. That's my trademark. Step on somebody else's touchdown call. That's what I'm known for. So I gotta keep going with it. No,
we all
great to be here.
On our brand. Yeah, it is. It's things are looking up, I guess. I don't know. I might be in a better mood than I was last week for people that were tuning in last week. I was a little down, but you and Mr. Tim McNiff found a way to get me excited about the offseason somehow, and we are, again, joined by Mr. McNiff. How are you, my friend?
I think we should just be clear to people that the only reason I'm here is because somebody else said no again. So, yeah. I'm that guy you call when the fourth person doesn't show up for your round of golf. Yeah, I'll be there. Where are we playing?
Hey, Oberle, you told me Tice would be here. You give me McNiff?
We like to keep people on their toes.
Since Tice isn't here, I'm going to say it's an upgrade. So there you go.
I don't think these radio waves reach Seattle, so I think we'll be fine. We actually have a special guest, as people have heard in the background here during the introduction. Mr. Joe Oberle, why don't you introduce your friend?
My friend. Okay. Yeah. We are a crowded house here today. We already got the three regulars, and joining us is Mark Craig from the Star Tribune, longtime sports writer from golf and football, NFL, Vikings, and most recently, well, not most recently, but also known as the sole Hall of Fame voter for the Vikings. I wish for the NFL in town. So Mark Craig joins us, and we're glad to have you. How you doing, Mark?
Doing well. Thanks for having me on, guys.
Yeah, man. Thank you so much. I have a million different questions for you, and I will admit my ignorance for this subject. But about 5 to 6 weeks ago, Mr. Bob Sansevier, who writes a weekly column for VikingsTerritory.com, wrote an article essentially discussing the 1 year that he was like a sort of the Tim McNiff of Hall of Fame voters. He got to go for just 1 year back in like the late 80s, early 90s, and he described the process. And I wasn't aware that it was basically one guy per market. I guess I never really looked into it. I thought it was maybe like an Academy Awards thing where other Hall of Famers vote or something. But I would be remiss if we didn't start by talking about Jared Allen. What you thought about his bid this year? Did you expect him to go maybe as far as he did? What are your expectations for him moving forward?
Well, I mean, you always got to look at who the class that they're in with. I mean, this year there were two locks. I mean, Peyton Manning. The discussion on Peyton Manning took 21 seconds, and it's basically a person raising their hand and saying Peyton Manning, and we all laugh, and then it's over. So he was in on 21 seconds, and then Charles Woodson was a little bit longer discussion, but he was considered a lock. And then there was the longest discussion was on Calvin Johnson. I was surprised that he was he would get in his first year. But he ended up getting in on his first year. So right there, you got 3 first-year guys out of the 5 modern-era guys that can get in. So that leaves room for 2 more. So Jared was kind of out of luck this year, I think, considering it was down to 3 spots, and then Calvin Johnson gets that 3rd spot. or gets the third spot, and then you had a bunch of guys that have been waiting around forever. John Lynch. I feel like we've been talking about John Lynch since Abraham Lincoln. He gets in on his 8th year of eligibility, or 8th year eight straight years as a finalist. And then another guy that I thought would have gotten in earlier, but there was a log jam at offensive lineman that was broken up with Mawai getting in one year, Steve Hutchinson getting in last year, and then this year Alan Faneca, his 6th year of eligibility. It's a 6-time All-Pro first team. Would have been 7 times if he hadn't had to play tackle one year because of injuries. So you look at a guy like him that waits 6 years. And then you think of the TOs that get offended because they're not in the first year. It's once you're in, you're in. There is no special wing for the first ballot guys, but Lynch and Faneca got those other 2 spots, and Jared's like a lot of guys has to wait. And you look through history, the guys who have had to wait, beyond a year. I mean that's a pretty impressive list, and it includes guys like Alan Page.
Mark, you presented Jared Allen to the committee. I mean, that's part of your duties when there's a guy in your area or your team that you cover is up for it. Can you tell us a little bit of what that process is like, and how do you change it up next year when you go back there and put his case forward again?
Well, yeah, I think you do have to change up because you look at the fact that especially this year when he didn't even make the cut from 15 to 10. Sometimes I feel bad for these guys. I almost feel like we should. There's a lot of things that could change that would maybe make it better. But one thing I feel like is publicizing 15 guys, and sometimes guys get stuck in that they don't make it from 15. They don't make it the cut to 10. Most Hall of Fame selectors will tell you that the cut from 15 to 10, not that it's easy, but it is infinitely easier than that cut from 10 to 5. Because then you cut from 10 to 5, and then you vote yes or no on those remaining 5. So, to me, you change it up when they don't make. I mean, obviously, you can't change his career, and sometimes I think selectors take too much credit or too much blame. I didn't get Randy Moss in as his first ballot Hall of Famer. It was Randy Moss being Randy Moss. Same thing with Randall McDaniel, John Randall. Those guys weren't first ballot guys, but those are guys that I spoke about. And Hutch last year, I helped present that case. Wasn't the lead guy on that, but talked about him. So you see both ends of it. And with Jared, it was not. I was surprised, and I'm going to have to ask around and find out why there was virtually zero discussion on him, and we just kind of moved. No one had anything to say, and I've seen that happen before on guys as good as Will Shields, his first year, they got done with the presentation, and then I don't know if it's people run out of steam because you'll find that the discussions earlier in the process, unless it's a Tagliabue at the end or something like that, but the guys early in the process tend to have longer discussions, and as you get toward the end, that meeting was almost 9 hours long, so to find out why. But getting back to my original point was why publicize 15 whenever you tend to have guys that come back year after year after year. They're in that 15 and then they don't get in. It's almost like we should be talking about a narrower field once we get to this point.
Did Kansas City help you present Jared Allen?
The now late Therese Paler, who passed away a couple days after the Super Bowl, selector, real outstanding reporter, well-known guy. He died. He's only 37 years old. 2 days after the Super Bowl.
I saw that.
He spoke up on Jared, but then there was nothing else after that. Jared's discussion was eight minutes. It was the second shortest from Peyton Manning being. And it was a couple seconds shorter than Rondé Barber's. It was just like 8 minutes and 20 seconds. So, I like the time. I'll just kind of get a feel. Calvin Johnson was the longest, over 39 minutes.
So when you're having that discussion, I mean, your presentation, you're obviously putting out their career, their stats, what they've accomplished, this, that. Do you guys talk about other things too, like what kind of person they were, how they
off the field issues?
Does that ever come into the discussion?
That doesn't come into play. You're instructed that, whether they were a good guy, and people have said that over the years. T.O. wasn't a good guy. Wasn't good with the media. That's not what torpedoed. I mean, I can't give details, but that's not what it wasn't. T.O. didn't get in on year 3 because the media didn't like him. I mean, there's a lot of guys the media doesn't like, and players that don't like the media. Randy Moss didn't like the media. I didn't particularly care for Randy Moss, but Randy Moss was a Hall of Fame player. T.O. He was in my final 10. I don't know. I'm sure he made the final 10 each year, but I had him on my ballot. I didn't care for him. I didn't really know him, but that's irrelevant. People have said that guys don't get in because of that. I don't believe that. But no, you talk about impact on the game. Just numerous things, but you try to go beyond the statistics, especially because the game changes so much, and especially when it comes to receivers. I mean, forever there was a log jam with Chris Carter, Tim Brown, and
Andre Reed.
Andre Reed. Oh my gosh, we gave those presentations forever, and Chris was the first one to get in, and basically it boiled down to, people were saying, well, was Wes Welker a Hall of Famer based on his numbers? And to me, it boiled down to Chris Carter had 130 touchdowns, and at the time that was, I don't know, third or whatever in NFL history, and it was like, okay, here's how long Wes Welker had, 40 some or whatever it was. A lot of catches, the game's changed. But I said, Wes Welker would have to play, I think it was like 28 years at his pace or whatever it was. So to me, it was scoring for Chris. And a lot of it, we talk a lot about the eye test, and a guy like Chris Carter, his hands,
they were pretty good. He was pretty good.
The way that he could maneuver, they talk about stretching the field, vertically. He stretched the field horizontally with how he could work the sidelines, and it was just I thought a Hall of Fame player visually. So yeah, you end up. A lot of it's the eye test because and then when you get to the older guys, someone that maybe we haven't seen, you have to do a little bit more research. It takes a lot of time, and there's a lot of effort that goes into this. We don't just roll out of bed that day and say, oh, who do we got?
One more throughout the year. I'm sorry, but one more quick question on the process. How much interaction do you have with the candidate when this is happening? I mean, I'm sure you had to go back and forth with Chris, and once he didn't get in again, and then say, what are we going to do next year? How much of there is that, or is there any at all?
Oh, there's a lot. I mean, you talk to, and you talk about a lot of different personalities. I mean, Chris was not happy that he wasn't a first year guy. I think Chris went there that first year thinking this is it, and was extremely upset. But a guy like Jared was like, hey, if I get in, I get in. If I don't, I don't. And I know he's not happy, but I there's some guys roll with the punches. Other guys want to punch someone.
Hey, Mark, if I might, so years ago, I was at the Super Bowl of the Packers and the Broncos, and it was the year Paul Krause got in. And I'm on the field, and it was media day, and I see the legendary Paul Zimmerman, who wrote Dr. Z, who wrote for Sports Illustrated forever. And I'm like, that's my soundbite. I can get Dr. Z talking about Paul Krause, and so I'm like all nervous to ask him a question. And he stops in the field, and he'll get me my question, and I ask him about Krause getting in, and he says, for years I thought Krause played a little soft, but then I saw on TV somewhere that's kind of what the Vikings asked him to do. And then I kind of thought, well, maybe. And I wanted to say, what the bleep? You're telling me you watched NFL films and you saw this and it changed your mind? And I was so massively disappointed by that. So, I just, without naming names, do you ever get guys that say stuff and you're just like, did you just roll out of bed this morning? And then if you would, the other thing I'd like to ask you about is the potential of Jim Marshall making the Hall of Fame while Jim Marshall is still on this planet. Does it exist?
Yeah, the first part, Dr. Z, I'm surprised to hear that because, Doctor, you talk about one of the most
the God.
guys. that he's our careers obviously overlapped. I was never in the Hall of Fame room with him. By the time I was doing it, I did a handful of years when Sid was still saying that he was going to go, and then Sid at the last minute didn't go. And I was at the Super Bowl anyway, so I would do it. But I was always preparing as if Sid wasn't going to go until they finally decided to move him aside because they knew he wasn't going to come again. But, Sid, he wasn't going to give it up. So my first one was Randall McDaniel. And my first year I walk in there and I'm looking around the room. And obviously it's the most well-respected people that there is in the business. And I had Randall McDaniel, John Randall, and Chris Carter. So it was like, oh, okay. So, it was a pretty sleepless night the night before that. And Randall McDaniel got in that year, which I was maybe his second or third crack at it, which if there's a guard in NFL history that should be in his first ballot, Randall's in that top handful of guys. But getting back to, Dr. Z, I'm surprised because, he was well known for – knowing the league inside and out. But even that, that's been, over 20 years. Information, it's hard to believe now without, that there was a time before the internet when we actually had to make little notes in our media guides to remember things and look at dictionaries and stuff. But, maybe there wasn't as much information readily available to them. But no, I get the overall right now, especially now, there's 48 selectors. Each market has at least one, and then there's at-large guys, and they're adding on to the committee as well. But I think everyone takes it extremely seriously and does a lot of homework on it. And then the other part is that never-ending question about Jim Marshall is, I've spent a lot of time talking to Jim and his wife, and those are the guys I feel bad for because even if he doesn't get in. It doesn't change. I mean, obviously, he'd become a Hall of Famer, but Jim Marshall is great. And I think too many times we're caught up in, especially in today's society, that you're either a Hall of Famer or you're a third string nobody. And it's like if you say that so-and-so someone asks you, do you think so-and-so is a Hall of Famer? And you hesitate because it may be an extremely good player, and you don't think he's a Hall of Famer. And I'm not talking about Jim because I do think he's a Hall of Famer. But you'll say, well, there's a Hall of Very Good. Well, instantly now, with everything being completely black and white, it's, well, you think he was a terrible player. No, the Hall of Fame should be hard to get into. I think as far as Jim's case, unfortunately, when they had that centennial class last year and they had the opportunity to open it up, and that centennial class, the old timers in that class were picked by a separate blue ribbon committee, which also included guys like Bill Belichick. And when they selected that committee and didn't put Jim on it, that hurt because that was a chance to get a guy that played such a high percentage of the first 100 years of the NFL and was the heart and soul and Bud Grant's teams that made it to 4 out of the first 11 Super Bowls. When he didn't get on that was a blow. And I hope that he does because, people didn't think that Mick Tingelhoff would get in, but eventually he fell into the chamber of this backlog of senior candidates and he got in. Unfortunately, when Mick got in, Mick's health wasn't the greatest. Didn't really enjoy it like he should have. I don't know how much of he was aware of what was going on. Created one of the greatest scenes. Unfortunately, it was a great scene when Fran Tarkenton went up and shared that moment with Mick.
Right, that was a big deal. It was I was happy to see that, and Fran really kind of came forward and took care of things. That was a neat moment.
Do you think Marshall would be in if the Vikings had won one of those Super Bowls, or how important are championships to somebody's chances, and does it vary by position? Like a quarterback obviously might get more credit for winning a Super Bowl than a defensive lineman would, but you hear that a lot from people saying that maybe too much weight is put on who is the Super Bowl or who has a ring.
Well, yeah, I mean, that probably hurt him, especially, early in his eligibility years, because you saw that, guys weren't getting in, and I think Tarkenton waited 3 years. Like maybe a Lynn Swan, if they don't win those Super Bowls, maybe he doesn't get in. So, yeah, I think it's an impact. It's you can't change their careers. You can't say if he would have won a Super Bowl, or you hear it a lot of the arguments now you hear in the room as well, if he'd have played with a better quarterback, or if he had been on a better team, or if he hadn't been hurt. There's a lot of ifs, and I always have a hard time, accepting the ifs. We can't go back and rewrite the history. And it's hard for me to read the minds of 47 other people, because half the time I don't know what's in my own head. So to me, it's hard to, if you did a survey and everyone was completely honest, and maybe championships do have an impact, but I don't know if you, because you could say, yeah, it affected Jim, but Carl Eller's in the Hall of Fame, and Paul Krause is in the Hall of Fame, and Fran Tarkenton's in the Hall of Fame, Bud Grant's in the Hall of Fame. With the Bills, Marv Levy,
Bruce Smith,
Andre
Reed.
Guys.
Yeah,
Andre Reed.
It takes longer, I think, but eventually I think the cream rises to the top. And you made the point earlier. Some years I just look at the class and I just think, ooh, that's brutal. There's so many, just really, really deserving people, but it's a Hall of Fame. It should be hard to get into. You said that.
And one thing that bothers me, especially when you get and I always thought that it would happen. I used to joke because I worked in Canton for 12 years and got to know Joe Horrigan, Joe Horrigan knows the most about football history of anybody walking the planet right now. He's a walking encyclopedia of NFL history. And I used to joke with him. I said, as these players become more and more, entitled, you're going to find a guy that's not going to show up. And, T.O. ended up being that guy. I kind of joked, I thought maybe Moss would be that guy. But Randy matured toward, especially after he left football, and was well-deserving as a first ballot guy. But yeah, it's, when you look at it, the first ballot guys are the guys who are true, could be true Hall of Famers. You just walk in and you say Brett Favre, or you say Peyton Manning, but there are a lot of guys like Jim Marshall that deserve to be in, but just aren't in there. It's unfortunate.
Go ahead, Joe. I've asked plenty. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, during the season, Mike Tice had tweeted something that I covered as an article, essentially saying that he believed that the Hall of Fame voting process should open up to former coaches and former players. And I don't know what the distinction there would be if people had to play X amount of years or coach X amount of years, but go from the 48 people you're talking about to, hundreds, if not thousands. What are your thoughts on that? Do you think that that would make the process more fair, or would that add more bias from which players are on which teams voting for their teammates? It's an interesting concept, I suppose. But
it's so interesting that it's actually happening. You can tell Ticey, Tony Dungy is a Hall of Fame selector. Bill Polian is a Hall of Fame selector. Dan Fouts is a Hall of Fame selector. James Lofton is a Hall of Fame selector. And other guys have been asked that I can't, there's two that I know of that were asked and said they didn't have the time for it. But it's happening. And believe me, this was Tony and Bill's first year in the room. It was virtual this year, which doesn't really matter, but they were in the room. They're invaluable. And Fouts and James Lofton have been in for a handful of years. And they're invaluable. And that's when people, bring that to you. They bring it a lot of times. They bring it to you as almost like a a club, they're coming after you. Like, you should open it up to everybody. And well, I don't make the rules. I could care less. They asked me to do it. I've followed the NFL since Joe was following Abraham Lincoln, and
wow.
So I decided, I'll do it. I did it for Sid for a while, then I became the full-time guy and have a tremendous respect for the Hall of Fame. Used to live in Canton. So, yeah, I'd be all in favor. And I think we're going to see more of that. We're going to see, as you see the discussions enhanced by a Bill Polian or a Tony Dungy, Dan Faust, James Lofton, you're probably going to see more and more. But, there has to be guys in there that take it seriously. Quite frankly, there's a lot of NFL players, great NFL players that, they didn't watch the NFL growing up. They didn't watch the NFL when they were in the NFL, and they certainly aren't watching it now because they've moved on to business interest or they're done with the game. I mean, what you can't have happen is just get someone in there that just doesn't care about it and they just want to get their buddies in. A lot of times you'll sit there and watch the honors show or a show that's introducing the Hall of Famers, and as each guy, as they introduce each guy, they'll say, this be 15 guys that there'll be a panel of former players or Hall of Famers, and each guy that doesn't get in, it's a crime against humanity that guy didn't get in. And as Bill and Tony and Dan and James have found out, when you're sitting there with that ballot, there's no, hey, let's put 10 guys in, let's put 15 guys in. It's 5 guys. It's 5 guys. Make your choice. And there's no, just put them all in.
What about that? Doesn't that, isn't a Hall of Famer a Hall of Famer? And it shouldn't matter how many guys you have to, why couldn't you change that and to make sure you get all the Hall of Famers in? I'm asking this as devil's advocate.
Well, yeah, no, I wouldn't be open to that because baseball, I don't want to speak out of turn because I don't know a whole lot about baseball, but I sort of respect baseball when there are years that I think maybe this is a year that nobody got in. Right.
That's correct.
I'm okay with that. I know there's a lot of selectors, and I'm not saying anybody who got in shouldn't get in. I'm not going down that path. What I'm saying is that I would rather have no minimum than taking away the maximum. Obviously, I don't know what Cooperstown does when there's no Hall of Famer. Do they just not have a ceremony? With Canton, there's a minimum because there's a big show every year that they put on, and they need Hall of Famers for that show. But I don't have a problem with baseball. If there's not a Hall of Famer, no one goes in that year. So, and I know that I don't know how many people vote on baseball Hall of Fame, but I know it's a lot more than football.
And it feels like with baseball too, like a lot of the guys that would otherwise be in from a time perspective or being eligible for the first time have a lot of the so-called asterisks by their career. Barry Bonds, Roger Clemens, A-Rod even if he's eligible now. I don't think he is yet, but the steroid era essentially is coming of age for eligibility, or a lot of those guys are floating around for the 9th time. I think that has a huge impact on whether or not they can make the Hall. I don't think they ever will. I think it's like I don't know. I not to get into baseball, but I kind of thought Barry Bonds was great and didn't need steroids, and he did amazing things on steroids when everyone else was on steroids. So I'm kind of on two minds in that regard, just because if everyone was doing it, yes, it's cheating, but isn't that kind of the main thing with baseball? Or is everyone that is on Houston not going to make the Hall of Fame now because they were stealing signs or whatever? It's an interesting thing. I've always kind of thought one of the main, if you're not cheating in baseball, or at least trying to, you're not doing your job, is I think the adage. What do you think about Chuck Foreman though? There was Sansevier wrote an article about him and essentially interviewed him for it, and the crux of it was Foreman felt that the team wasn't advocating for him, and if the team doesn't push for you, you stand no chance.
Yeah, I don't believe that at all, because there's guys that have gone in where the team didn't advocate at all. And there's guys where the team stepped up and advocated for. Probably the greatest push that the Vikings have made in recent years is Jim Marshall. And they asked me what to do, and I don't know that if someone calls you and how much impact it has on you. But I said, one of the most trustworthy guys, and the most trustworthy guy, probably the voice in the history of this franchise, is Bud Grant. So get Bud involved and tell him why, because it goes, Jim has the games played, the starts played, the sacks, when he retired, he had played 20 years out of the NFL's, 60 years or whatever it was. I mean, he was he was there forever, and he played at a high level and for that many years. But, Bud Grant made calls, and it didn't gain any traction. So, and you've had other guys where I don't believe they've done anything, and not that they should do anything. I mean, people need to do their own homework in some regard. But like a Randall McDaniel or John Randall, there's too many examples of guys that are in the Hall of Fame that the team didn't push for, that if you're going to make the argument that you're done if the team doesn't push for you, there's too much evidence on the other side of it.
Mark, what is the voting, or I should say the people like you, the Hall of Fame voters, what does that group look like? Are they more like Sid and you, or are they?
I'm one of the young bucks, baby.
Okay.
He threw you in the same boat with Sid Hartman, so there was his payback for the Abe Lincoln comments.
Thanks, right? Thank you, Jim. That's where I was going for. But I mean, are there a lot younger guys now that might not know, or can put into context the Jim Marshall and what he meant to the league? I mean, you're saying some nice things there. He's played this percentage of the league to that point, but they don't. I don't think they can have that context in their brain. Well, it's laid right out there in front of them.
Well, that's another twist. There's another twist to the process, is that once you're retired 25 years, your eligibility as a modern era player expires. You go into a senior committee. And there's probably 8 or 10, I'm not sure, 8 or 10. I'm not on the senior committee selection committee, but they meet separately, to present a candidate to the full committee. And that senior committee is aided by 2 former Hall of Famers from that similar eras. So, Jim Marshall's name has been in the hopper of those senior candidates for however many years it's been since he's been retired, 25 years. He was in there with the likes of, Mick Tingelhoff, which came out of that hopper, So it's not the young guys, or I guess young in the selection committee. Like Therese was 37, and he might have been one of the youngest, probably was the youngest guy in there. But, the senior guys like Jim Marshall are being analyzed by senior committee members who are getting help from contemporaries of those players. So it's not like, they're getting so much extra vetting that when the senior, you see when a senior committee candidate is presented to the full committee, he goes in because he's been so well vetted.
Well, that's interesting. Yeah, there's never been a player that Bud Grant would love in there more than Jim Marshall, and having grown up watching, I'd agree with him.
Yeah, I think Jim is Jim was Jim and Mick Tingelhoff were the Vikings, the heart and soul of the Vikings, and without those two, and Bud Grant has said this to me and other people, I'm sure, but without Jim and Mick coming on board to Bud's program, and Bud would have been run out. Bud was not at that. He was young at that time. Marshall had bought in, and if Marshall hadn't bought into his program, then Bud Grant's probably not Bud Grant.
Yeah, that's a good point.
I wonder what the new age of younger guys and this proliferation of statistics and analytics kind of taking over. Everyone's trying to quantify the unquantifiable. And I wrote an article this week on purple PTSD. This Pro Football Reference came out with the Hall of Fame meter, putting together all these statistics to find the probability that current or recently retired players will make the Hall of Fame, and it had like Harrison Smith at like a 37, and the average number was like 110 to get in for a safety. I'm not the biggest fan of analytics. I understand that they serve a purpose, but I think a lot of those guys think that they can just throw statistics out in a debate, and basically say, well, see, it doesn't tell the entire story of a game with an incredible amount of variables. And so I wanted your take kind of on if you've noticed some more of that creeping into the process, or if you're as kind of against it as I am.
Yeah, I mean, I'm somewhere closer to Zimmer when it comes to analytics than I am a lot of the people who cover the NFL now. I just every time an analytic number is thrown at me, I think of, well, here's X, Y, and Z of why maybe that happened. That, or I say a missed tackle. Say maybe a guy leaves his position and forces a guy to change directions. He misses the tackle, but someone else makes it. Just all these different things go through my mind when I hear all these analytics. But I also, when it comes to like people putting numbers on guys whose careers aren't done, and people were talking about Harrison Smith as a Hall of Famer when Harrison Smith was in his 6th year or whatever. He's made he's a first team. He's made an first team All Pro, and he's a terrific player. So yeah, he has a chance. But it's just after the Super Bowl, I was watching TV, and obviously, 24 hours, you got to fill it with stuff. But it's like, Patrick Mahomes, who's 25 years old. Now that he's like, if he were to retire today, is he a Hall of Famer? And okay, so I'm thinking, all right, yeah. The discussions start getting. Maybe it'll be on draft day now where we start talking about whether it's a Hall of Famer. I just don't get it.
Mark, did the process you mentioned that Blue Ribbon Committee and the sort of the expansion they did a year ago? I found it really, I don't want to say suspicious or distasteful, but to have the the head of the whole committee like walk onto the middle of the NFL Today and then CBS's show and let Bill Cowher know and let Jimmy Johnson know that they'd been voted into the Hall of Fame, and I'm like, seriously? I mean, it just seemed like it was such a self-promoting vehicle, and not to say that those two weren't innovative and obviously Super Bowl winning coaches and very good at what they did, but again, I think of a Jim Marshall. Did that come at the expense of a Jim Marshall?
Yeah, I mean, I don't. Yeah, that's not my question for me. I don't know. I mean, it's.
Were they from the same pool?
I have a hard time believing that if you look at who was on the Blue Ribbon Committee, that they picked those two just for that purpose. Now, the Hall of Fame has changed. I mean, I go back when I worked in Canton in the 80s and early and mid 90s. The Hall of Fame was, on the front steps of the Hall of Fame, the speeches. Sometimes the game was kicking off before the speeches were over, and now it's a 3 or 4 day process of, the speeches are separate. They're in the stadium. I mean, it's gone from a mom and pop operation to, big time corporate, and so yeah, they're gonna seize those moments. But I don't think that Bill Cowher and Jimmy Johnson got in before that reason, because even though the committee, they changed their bylaws and they, for that year, to get 20 more guys in, bypassed us, the selection committee, but there were some people on the selection committee that were on this Blue Ribbon Committee. But originally they were going to have present the 20 to the full committee, and then we had to vote yes or no on all 20. If we had disagreed with one person on their 20, we could vote no, and it would wipe out the whole class. Well, I think they got spooked that maybe there'd be too many of us, because you have to get 80% of the votes for the full committee. I think they got spooked that maybe they wouldn't get 80%, and they would have 20 people not get in. So I think it was changed again to where the Blue Ribbon Committee selected that class. We didn't have anything to do with it.
Mm-hmm. Mark, you said you were back in Canton in the 80s. Was that the 1880s or the Grover Cleveland area, or what was that?
The 1780s.
1780s. Okay.
I lived in a nice little log cabin, Joe.
Just a second. I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you this as well. What are your thoughts on the Vikings as of right now? What do you think the franchise is generally? I mean, maybe looking at 2020 and then what's happening with free agency and the cap moving forward. Do you think they're on the upswing or?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, last year was just such a. I mean, from start to finish, it was. I mean, we overestimated even without an off season. I think I picked them 9-7. Generally, I pick 8-8 because that's the closest to being right, whether they're good or bad. So it's just so hard to tell. Things change so much. I mean, you go into there's no off season. They had all those at the worst possible time with the rookie corners. Yeah, and then Daniil Hunter. Each day he's standing there in the summer. I'm like, this isn't right. I said, and even though Zimmer was downplaying it, I'm like, until this guy shows up, this isn't good. And so you lose one of the best pass rushers in the league, and then before that, Michael Pierce, and then opts out. And to me, it's just so many things happen during the season that can't happen during the season that can just wipe things out. And boy, did they. The injuries just clobbered them. So if they're completely healthy, if they're got to keep adding to the offensive line, and they certainly have the talent offensively and the coaching ability defensively, I think, to bounce back. I mean, I think the last 4 NFC Super Bowl teams didn't miss the playoffs the year before.
Wow.
Tampa Bay obviously. I mean, it was a perfect storm for them because they had a really good, extremely talented roster and was missing only one piece at quarterback, and that one piece happens to be Tom Brady, who just continues to amaze. But there are other examples. Philadelphia, I think, when they won it, they missed the playoffs the year before. When the Rams made the Super Bowl, they didn't make the playoffs the year before. So it's a league that just changes. You can change immediately from year to year. As we find out with the Vikings, each year it's you're out of the playoffs, you're in the playoffs. I think they need to establish some consistency and their window for opportunity was 2019 when they had the quarterback they wanted and all the defensive players that they wanted and they were healthy. So when they missed it there, then you looked at a reboot.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing your insight with us. It's means a lot to us, and not bringing up how many mulligans overly takes, I think, is a good sign that you're trustworthy.
Not enough, because playing with golf with Craig is a handicap all of its own. So I just
Joe, we were in a golf tournament. I shouldn't call it a tournament, but we played this some buddies down in Florida for years, and Joe is by himself in a sand trap, and he stops play, and there's people behind us, and he stops playing. And he says, "Guys, come over here. We're like, what? And so I walk over, and he's like, my club touched the sand, and I got to call a penalty on myself. And I said, come on, Joe. I said, look around. You think we care if you touch the sand or not? Well, he wasn't in there digging it, taking a practice shot. He just grazed it like someone on CBS a viewer was going to call in and report him or something. I said, just hit the ball, Joe.
That's the most orderly story I've ever heard in my entire life.
Well,
yeah, he's a stickler.
I wrote a rules column for the Minnesota Golfer for years. I mean, it's kind of hypocritical if I don't play by the rules when I tell everybody else to. So, better call that.
Yeah, as golf's finding out, Joe, some of the rules were stupid. And that's why they're changing them, Joe. They're becoming more like our FUBAR rules than they are the PGA Tour rules.
Yes,
SGA.
I actually lettered in golf. I don't know, Joe, if you knew that, or maybe I told you that
Yes, I have.
in high school, and the best way to sum up my abilities at the time, which were better than they are now, was when I turned my scorecard in after a tournament. The person would laugh and say, "No, really, what was your score?" They would put me with the number one guys on the other team because I would take so long that it would frustrate the opponent, and their scores would go down by like 8 strokes. Not my thing. More of a
tough
hockey
story
thing.
in golf yesterday for crying out loud. Tiger Woods deal, man. I hope somehow he can rally and come back. You know, I don't need to see him on a golf course. That's severe stuff. But
what's the latest on that? Because I know you just had back surgery, so then this happens. I mean, does he have?
It sounds like there were 2 broken bones in his lower leg, and then his ankle shattered.
Shattered bones. Yeah.
Yeah, and so he's got a pin in his leg and a bunch of screws and other metal in his foot or his ankle to put that back together. And at 45 years old, I don't know how you come back from that, but I just hope he does well and he can walk again and if it comes back.
Yeah, with the torque that you put on your ankle with the swing, that's gonna be. Because I shattered my ankle in 3 places like 2 years ago, and I had surgery. I broke my foot too, and they basically just fuse everything because there's so many bones. There's not a whole lot they can do there.
Mm-hmm.
But man, that guy just has been accumulating injuries. It seems like, but he got away with some of the worst of it. From avoiding some of the worst of it. It seems.
When I came to Star Tribune in '99, John Rowe retired before the 2000 golf season. And they said, "Does anyone want to be the golf writer?" And I said, "Yeah, I'd love to be the golf writer." And my first 3 majors that I covered was Tiger Woods at Pebble Beach in 2000, Tiger Woods at Valhalla in the PGA in 2000, the Bob May playoff. And the third one was I didn't go to the British Open, but the third one was the Tiger Slam at the Augusta the next year.
Wow.
And I think I covered like 11 majors, 11 or 12, and Tiger won 6 of them or something. It was, you just, it was such a highlight of just being somewhere in person to see him play and just to see what he could do. And anyone, you play golf, you obviously have a bigger respect for what he's doing, but just even the people who don't play golf, I think, looked at things he did and went, wow, he keeps making these putts or he keeps making these shots. And it was impressive to watch.
Good time to be a golf writer, that's for sure.
Yeah, it was a wheelhouse.
Yeah, he really changed the game. I mean, it was younger sponsors. Kids started playing it more and more. Kids in the inner city where I grew up started playing it. I actually got to meet him at Hiawatha through this program at my school, where he tried to. If he made a hole-in-one on a par 3, like he was going to donate $1 million to something, and he spent like a lot of individual time with each kid. It was really
nice,
really kind of a crazy experience, to be honest with you, because that was like peak Tiger Woods fame, mostly like 2000, 2001. So yeah, hopefully things turn out well for him. Yeah. But thanks again, Mark, for stopping onto the show. You're always welcome to stop by whenever you'd like. Hopefully during the season we can chat more about the current Vikings team and see what happens, because I'm a little worried about the COVID cap as I keep bringing up, and some of these contracts, especially on defense. I'm not entirely sure some of the guys will be back. I'm a little worried about Daniel Hunter's acceptance of the status quo in regards to how he's getting paid. It seems like there's gonna be a reckoning. I don't know if I'm wrong about that, but it keeps me up at night.
Yeah, I mean it's the NFL. It changes. It's going to start changing quickly here when the league year opens, and you never bring back the same exact team. So we'll see.
Yeah, it's great to have you, Mark.
Thank you, Mark.
Thanks for having me, guys. Appreciate it.
And everyone obviously can check out Mark in the Star Tribune sports section. Great guy, great insight, man. That
check him out on Twitter too, because he's a lot of fun there. Especially in the week.
I try to keep my mouth shut on Twitter, Joe. That doesn't always work.
That's what I think it's at Mark Craig NFL, right, on Twitter. You can see him in Overly jawing back and forth. But I think that's a good place to put a pin in it for this week. I want to thank everybody for checking out the show, sharing it, subscribing to it on the different podcast platforms. I want to thank everybody in Detroit Lakes for tuning in every Wednesday night at 7 p.m. And check us out next week at 7 o'clock. At 7 o'clock p.m. on KBLM Sports or on VikingsTerritory.com, PurplePTSD.com. A little distracted. Sorry about that. But thanks, everybody, for tuning in. It's never a dull moment in the Johnson household. I will check in with everyone next week. Skull.
Thanks, guys.